Hello, Susan Corbett Custom Machine Quilter here with a traditional quilt that needed a traditional design scheme. This is another quilt in the Yellowstone quilt series that I think is delightful. Look at how scrappy it is, which I really love. And it's all done with continuous curves, freehand, and straight lines. That's it. Well, except for the border. I had planned to use a ruler to get those curves in there, but gave that up. I did use a ruler on the border, however. So here's a look at the quilt before it got quilted. You know, I usually ditch quilt blocks, but not on this quilt. Look how tiny the pieces are. Pause the video here and read the increments on that ruler. To ditch quilt would have required a whole lot of painstaking work for not that much payoff. So I'm just trying to use this one curve to accomplish all sorts of things. I want to nail down the piecing somehow, but not squash it. So you see how just that one gentle curve is going to end up accentuating the center square. It's just going to puff up really nicely. The batting is Hobbs 80/20, which has enough loft to make that center square puff up. And not doing any ditch quilting, but leaving puff between the continuous curve and the straight lines that are coming in the zigzag stair-step background fabric. That seam is going to puff up and it's going to look really good. Part of the reason I like to ditch quilt so much is because what you don't quilt down puffs up. And if you leave a seam unquilted in a really haphazard way, it's not going to look very attractive. But here, all the seams are uniform. They're all puffing up in the same way, in a deliberate, straight and then curvy manner, and it's just going to look gorgeous. There's a shot coming up here at some point that will show the dimension. So this was the fast part of the quilt. The straight lines are the slow part, but this part went pretty fast. On your machine, you might be able to quilt all the way from left to right and then be able to keep on stitching from right to left. I'm using Superior Sew Fine thread here, which is a good strong thread. It's a poly, thin, but it's going to shred. You know, I tried it and it did. I could quilt 3 or 4 blocks and then that thread would start shredding. I've heard if your thread does that, it's a problem with your machine. You can't have it set up properly, and I don't believe that to be true. I really don't. I think that's a feature of this particular thread. It's thin. And if you give it a chance to shred, it probably might. I don't know. So already you see the wonderful dimension popping up. I'm liking the way that's looking. This was quilted, well, the body of the quilt was quilted with the same thread all the way out throughout. It's the color of the zigzag fabric, which I think is gorgeous. It has a tea-dyed look, you know, kind of a brown paper bag sort of appearance, which makes it look vintage. And that's just really gorgeous. So now we move on to the straight line part. And there were lots of options here. Well, we could have filled up the tan fabric with lots of different things. I could have just done some kind of a pattern meander, but then I'd be unhappy with not having ditch quilting in here. And to ditch quilt all those blocks would have taken up so much time that I don't think would have been worth it. The way the seams puff up in between the lines and the continuous curve that's really good and uniform in a pleasing way, not in a distracting, lumpy, bumpy way. So that was pretty good. I could have done more lines than just 2, but we thought 2 was fine. So it wasn't overly quilted. 3 would have been really good. But the more lines you put in, well, sometimes you go to do straight lines and you realize they're only accentuating problems with the piecing. And I had a hard time deciding what I was going to line that ruler up with. And the more precise I tried to be, the less wonderful it was looking. So in the end, I just plunked that ruler down there and eyeballed it and had good results. Letting go. And see how the lines aren't perfectly straight? I mean, the lines on the ruler versus the lines of the piecing. They're pretty good, but not completely accurate. So that was what was giving me misgivings. In the end, my favorite rule prevailed. The eye sees what it thinks is there, not what really is a lot of the time. What you're going to see on this quilt is the totality of the quilt top, not each individual little corner and space. So that works in our favor here. This is darling. Well, and being a quilt that's trying to look like it was made in 1880, this would not have been a show quilt, a presentation piece. It's out there on the prairie, on the frontier. So perfection wasn't the object anyway. It's just so pretty. This quilt has 6,829 pieces. It was strip pieced in 6-inch segments, and only a few of the block centers were fussy cut, which I think is pretty astounding. I love it, and I kind of want to make one. I've got untold bins full of teeny tiny strips, little tiny patches that this would be good for. And that would keep me busy for a very long time. And I'm not sure how much time the client has in this quilt. It is 73 by 78 inches. And the border's not real big. I forget the increment. It's not really too wide. But it's really something. So getting to the end of a row, then I had to think about what's going to happen in the end. I'm going to quilt a line all the way to the border. And then I'm going to have some awkward spaces left over. And I had thought I would do continuous curve in those places, and that didn't seem to be working out. So I ripped that out. It was just a little bit. And decided to go back and just add some more straight lines to it, which we will see here in just a minute. that was, it's always tedious to do all those stops and starts, but that's custom quilting. And they're small, so it didn't take forever. That's just kind of how that works. So now I'm going after the second row. I think it's better to do pairs or 3 lines. They look so much better than just one, but then you're quilting it that much more. But I think it's totally worth it in the end, as usual. Love custom quilting. It is worth all the trouble. Another way to quilt this part of the quilt would be, get a ruler and put some curves in there. Maybe go from point to point, and then do something in the middle. And here's a great look at the wonderful dimension. Oh, I think that's so pretty. And here's a look at the border. I did use rulers to put in some curves and then doubled those. This takes some math, and I messed up a few times, but you can't really see the mistakes anywhere. Yay. So I'm loving how that turned out. Looks really pretty. And you can see the spaces there at the end of the rows, how those were quilted. I used a brown thread to quilt the border. One feature of my machine I am loving right now is the ability to use a dark thread on top and a light thread in the bobbin, and neither thread will show. That takes a little bit of playing with the tension, but not hardly much at all. So that's wonderful. So here's the finished quilt. Really loving the way it looks. The farther away you get, the more evident it becomes how tiny those little patches are. Really good uniformity. And I suppose I could have used a different increment for the spacing of those arcs in the border, but I don't dislike how this one turned out. And look how beautiful the back is. We get a whole cloth effect. That happens with either a light back or a really dark one. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.